Hey, it's Ben. Welcome to the podcast. I am excited because we're going to be going into the next step on the 5 steps to going 10X. And today we're going to be talking about implementation. Now, implementation is probably going to be the most important of the steps when it comes to taking action. This is where the rubber starts to hit the road. And implementing your vision, getting through your obstacles, letting go of the actions that are not on your, not going to move you forwards. Implementing the ones that do move the needle is what this podcast is all about. And then finally, on the next podcast and the last podcast in this small series, is we're going to be talking about the support that you need to keep implementing. So let's talk about this implementation. And if you ask me, this is the most important step that people often don't get to. And the reference point I'm going to share with you first and foremost is in the fitness world. So what I noticed in the fitness world is that people would either be not training, they would start training and they would quit quite soon because of some sort of circumstance, some sort of injury, some sort of change in their life. And what would happen is that would never build up enough fitness capacity to actually get into any sort of peaking phase. Or they never push past previous accolades of fitness because they weren't consistent enough. So many people experience that in the fitness world. And I know this happens in the business world and the career world as well, is that we don't get enough consistency to actually get to the point where we're eliciting our greatest performances on a week-by-week basis. So that's where so many people struggle. And I was talking to my group this morning, actually, and about this idea of creating capacity. Is you've got so much capacity in your support systems, in your mental bandwidth, in the way that you deal with problems, is that you can stay in action that moves the needle, that's helping you move forward. And this is what implementation is all about. So the reason people don't get to the peaking phase, they perhaps got caught up in obstacles that seem to get in the way. Internal obstacles, external obstacles. And for example, this could be where an internal obstacle is that you don't like selling. You've created a narrative that you don't like selling, so you've never really sold out your program, or you've never really had the business operating at full tilt. So you've never really gone past your upper limit and you've stayed safe because there's some sort of story that you've believed that has always self-sabotaged your progress. Or just sabotage your progress. Or equally, there could be an external obstacle that every time you get so far in a body transformation or you start losing weight that you've got a holiday or a birthday. And this is why it's so important to master implementation. This is a little like the athlete that never really reached their potential because they got so caught up in being injured, sick, that the athlete spent all their time training and never really gets on the field, let alone the podium. Like, oh my gosh, when I wrote that, I just remembered my own journey. I was that guy. I was training so hard to get back to listen to even to my language, to get to a level of fitness where I could compete. And because I would burn out, I would get injured, I would never get to that point where I was truly peaking in my personal performance. Whereas the guys that I worked with in my training group, guys that went to the Olympics, the guys that were world champions, they always had a system of just getting the work done, staying injury free, looking after themselves, and they always managed to peak. And now, were they any more talented than me? Not so much. They weren't that much more talented than me. However, they were talented at doing the very basics very, very well. There's actually a word I use, which is called, what's the word? Oh my gosh. I'm going to have to remember this word. It's going to have to come out before we go on. Stay with me. It is called a virtuosity, a virtuoso. It's doing the common things uncommonly well. Thank you for staying with me on that one. Doing the common things uncommonly well. And this is what implementation is all about. Implementation is doing common things. Sitting aside 90 minutes of in your calendar and doing deep work. It's a common thing to do deep work and do good work, but doing it uncommonly well, where your phone is switched off, you're really engaged, you're really getting deep, you're not task switching, trying to do multiple things. And the people that do the best work and move the fastest and get the furthest and are the most successful are the people that can do the common things uncommonly well. So I noticed that in sport, 99% of people aren't in the zone of performance. And I also noticed this in business, that a lot of my clients would come to me and they would not have strung together weeks and weeks and weeks of consistent quality performances, down to kids, down to bosses, down to stress, down to overworking and under resting and recuperating. All these sorts of things would happen, so they would never really peak. These kind of people are often injured, broken, burnt out, tired, and they're often feeling like they're coming back from injury, coming back from being ill, coming back from a holiday, coming back after an event, and they spend their whole life getting back to, catching up with, getting up to speed with. And that's a lot of the language that these people that I was working with would use. And it means that they haven't mastered implementation, where they are taking good quality actions in the now. There's a great book I read by Steve Chandler called This Moment. I think it's called The Gift of the Present Moment. Right now, that's what the name of the book. My words aren't coming out today very easily. But what we notice, that action for a lot of these people is in the future, or they're trying to keep up with an imaginary level of performance that they've never attained. So they're always in the gap. So what we want to do is we want to get into a system, or create a system, where we always feel like we're progressing. We always want to see how we're progressing week by week, month on month, year by year. And I'll share with you actually, this morning, it's 40 degrees now in Dubai. It was 32 this morning, and I knew that I had to get out and do, I'm using something called the Norwegian method of training. It's 4 minutes of running followed by 3 minutes of walking 4 times over. So you're doing 4 sets of 4 minutes with 3 minutes recovery. And each week I add up the distance, the total distance I do in those 4 sets of 4 minutes of running. And week on week, it's been getting more and more and more. So when I first started doing it, it was like 3.5 kilometers in total. This morning, it was something like 4.1 kilometers in total. So I've added 400 meters to my total volume over the last 4 weeks, which is what's happening is every single week, week on week, my implementation of my running is getting more and more effective. And I'm building on the last week's progress every single week. And the goal is, as long as I'm moving forwards, as long as I'm doing 1 meter more, I'm staying consistent, I'm not overexerting myself, I will keep building that number up. Every 10 days, I do that session. And it's working. And what I'm inviting you to do is to think about this same kind of mindset when it comes to your deep work, in work. So you actually look at your calendar and you say, hang on a second, I've got 10 deep work blocks in my calendar. I've got 2 90-minute blocks every day, Monday to Friday. So what you want to do on week 1 is assess how many times you did deep work, where you really, really did quality work for 90 minutes, where you're creating something to move your business, your life, your work forwards, and then assess. Now, week 1, you may only do 45 minutes. But we don't want to get in the gap and say that's not good enough, that's not, I'm terrible, I'm not going to get success. All we need to do is the following week, we go from 45 minutes maybe to 50, 60, 70 or 90. And that is progress. Actually, that's 100% progress. But most people say, I want to go from 1 deep work block to 10. And this is so much change. They don't create that implementation structure long term. I hope this is making sense, because this is very helpful when you start to think about your calendar like these tick boxes of work blocks, that when you do 5, 6, 7, like I know if I do 6 deep work blocks a week, I am doing really, really well. I'm creating things like this podcast right now. I'm creating this. This is in a deep work block. I just went through the notes before I did the session, and then I'm going to record it. It'll be about 45 minutes. And then I'm going to take a rest. And I'm going to take some time, might walk across the road to the pool. I love that I can say that. Go and cool down for a bit and then come back in. And what I do is oscillate between hyper-focused and hyper-relaxed parts of my day. I don't try and go and go and go. I tried to do that in my previous businesses and it doesn't work. So what we want to be able to do is create the capacity to put in the work. And the way that we do this is by nurturing that deep work and also nurturing the time we spend out of that deep work block as well. Like, how are we effectively resting, recuperating, connecting outside of those work blocks? Because they actually have a profound impact on how effective we are in that time. So this is something else I noticed when I was working with athletes and high-performing people. Few people have the ability or the capacity to put in the work because they're so tired, burnt out, and broken. They are so overwhelmed, overburdened, trying to do 80% of the work, getting 20% of the results, instead of flipping that, like we talked about on the last podcast, doing 20% of the things and getting 80% of the results, that they are burnt out, tired, and their mental clarity is so poor. So that's why we have to work on that 10X principle before we do the implementation. This is why that system works as it does. And so this, what happened in the athlete world, in the fitness world, is that when someone is overwhelmed, overworked, they can't do quality sessions. They'd start skipping sessions. They would miss meals. They would sleep badly. They would underhydrate. They'd get ill. They'd have events happen in their life, and they would just lose momentum. And momentum is probably the most important thing when it comes to implementation. Now, think about this. The more you do something, the easier it becomes to do it. I think about when you first went back to the gym, or when you started the gym, the first week is hell. You know, I know that. I was like, if I ever take a week off, which is, I haven't taken a week off for a long time, when I get back, I'm sore, I've lost momentum, I have to get the fires burning again. So the easiest way for me to keep momentum is just not to stop. So instead of doing nothing at all, I'll just go for a walk on a day where I'm not training, which is still a training session for me. And the best example for this at the highest level was David Brailsford. So he famously addressed this in Team GB cycling team, where they got really granular on something called the aggregation of marginal gains. And that's where virtuosity comes from, being uncommonly good at the common things. And what this means, it's the build-up of tiny little habits that when they come together, they create so much momentum that it's almost impossible not to perform at your actual best. And the way that you want to look at this is they even were teaching the athletes to clean under their fingernails. Why? Because this reduced the risk of getting ill. So improved hygiene, sleep hygiene. They would go to the various hotels on tours, on bike tours, and to the major competitions, and they'd have the same pillow. They would have the same go to bed time and wake up time. They were incredibly routined. They paid an enormous amount of attention to the aerodynamics of the cyclist and the bike. They looked at their nutrition. They looked at their mindset and their home support systems. Everything, no stone was left unturned. And the aggregation, the culmination of all those tiny little implementation intentions, what happened was they came together and they created one of the most effective cycling teams that has ever visited the Olympics. It was so amazing. I think it was the 2020. No, it was the London Olympics. I can't remember what year that was. And it was phenomenal to watch. So think about this when it comes to your implementation. It's about these tiny little things that seemingly don't matter, but when you do them, they do. And this is what I mean by this, is you might see a 90-minute work block in your calendar, and you might think to yourself, it doesn't matter if I don't do this today. But it really does, because the impact and the imprint that has on your subconscious is enormous. It's you telling yourself that you don't keep your word to yourself. Okay? So this is really important. So what does implementation look like? It looks like 90-minute to half-day stretches in your calendar Well, work gets done to move you forward. And now think about that. Like, open your calendar up right now, take a look inside. Have you got those stretches of time? Let me just take a sip of water. Because just even there, right? Okay, I took a sip of water from my bottle. It's a 1.8 litre bottle. If I drink that twice a day, I'm hydrated. That drastically reduces the likelihood of me getting ill, burnt out, or frustrated. Okay, so what I want to share with you is like, have you got those same systems in place for implementation? That is how you implement a health system. So 90-minute to half-day stretches in your calendar where work gets done that moves you forward. Have you got things like weekly reach out to people outside of your stratosphere? Now, these are what I would call bold moves. They are seemingly inconsequential pieces of time. They might be 5 to 10 minutes where you just send an email to perhaps a high performer, a thought leader, some sort of guru, and you say, hey, listen, I've been reading your book. And I think a conversation where we recorded it as a podcast or I paid for your time would really move the needle for me. Like, those are what I call potent actions as well. This might also look like time in your calendar for deep work or deep recovery. So we've got something in Dubai called Dr. Stretch, where I go to a local mall. It's like it's about 45 minutes away. And I literally lie down on a massage table and the masseuse bends, stretches me and moves me a little bit like Thai massage, and really, really keeps me moving really, really well. I feel better, I perform better, I think better when I treat myself like that. Now, is that implementation? Yes, it's putting in a system that's going to keep my joints, my body, me performing at my best. So that's deep recovery and also deep love. Like, are there times in your calendar where there's long stretches of uninterrupted time where your cell phone is away and you're with your family, your loved one, your partner? Because this is the thing. If you don't invest in those deep love blocks, what happens is ultimately, say, for example, you ignore your spouse for days, weeks, months. This leads to breakdown in the relationship, maybe long-term struggle in the relationship, and even divorce. And there was a study done amongst billionaires. And the number one thing amongst all billionaires is that the majority, I think it's like something crazy, like 90% of them, are still married. Because divorce is such a big threat to your deep work, your implementation, because it totally railroads your psychology, your financial structures and systems, perhaps even your business and even your career, right? So, and family, all that stuff is so pervasive. So if you think about this, investing in your spouse and your time and deep love with your family means that actually when you're doing your deep work, your implementation time, you're going to be able to focus, not feeling guilty or that you should go and do something with your partner or your kids. You're like, I feel guilt-free, I feel powerful, I'm moving forwards. And this is so important. It's so darn important. And this is what most of my clients were saying is I feel guilty when I'm in work, and when I'm at home, I can't stop thinking about work. And it's a lose-lose situation. And we want to eradicate that with deep love blocks. I know for a fact, after I've spent the weekend with my kids where I just do nothing else other than being my kids, I feel so ready and focused on the Monday to work at my best. Like even right now, this morning, I put until 9:30 to get the kids to school, be slow, not have to rush them, not to lose my temper, not get worked up. And then I started work later. So it allowed me that time and that presence with them in the morning, and it was way less stressful. So think about like, what does that look like for you? What does a deep love block look for? Like where you put your phone away, you're very present, so then you're more effective in your work time. And this is not just me espousing this. This is proven. If you read The Deep Work by Cal Newport, he talks about the value of this as well. Habits that negate longer-term problems that inhibit your momentum. And what I mean by this is like I talked about my drinking my water. So that's a habit. So every time I come to my desk, I've filled my water bottle. So it's got like an if this, then that algorithm. If I come back to my desk, then I fill up my water bottle. So sometimes I can be on a call, I reach for my water bottle and it's full and it's even cold. I've put ice in it and I can't even remember filling it up. It's so subconsciously regulated, that habit now. I can go to drink and I'm drinking 2 liters of water twice a day. I'm drinking enough so I know that I'm hydrated to run in the desert. You know, when you run in the desert every morning, you do get pretty dehydrated if you're not careful. So these habits negate longer term problems. If I was chronically dehydrated, eventually that would cause some sort of issue or problem with my health. So habits that negate longer term problems are things like having financial Fridays where you look at your finances and you remove things that are not actually helping you move forward. You get rid of maybe direct debits or costs that are not moving you forwards. These habits negate longer term problems and they increase your momentum when you get rid of these problems. Because what happens is you gain momentum. And as I talked about with that athlete analogy before, you go through the phases and you actually get to the point where you're peaking. And the final one is you learn to be effective versus busy. Now, this is something that I've really done since building the 10X tribe, is I've really looked at like what was effective for me versus busy. Now, in my previous business, I could say I was very busy and not effective. And I can look at all the businesses up until that point. It's like, yes, I can see where I've tried to occupy 80% of the activities that got me 20% of the results. And in totally rethinking a new business, I got to look at this from a different lens. Like, well, actually, how can I be effective? And constantly evaluating what is effective in my calendar versus what is busy. Now, a 90-minute deep work block where I create a podcast or go on someone else's podcast, or to create a training for my clients, or to prospect, or to go and speak on a stage, or create a new talk, or write a book. All these things are effective. But busyness is reacting to clients' whims, wants, other people's whims and wants. So you're never really doing things that actually move you forwards. And it's getting very good at looking for those things in your day. I'm just going to shift gears a second. And this is something I learned a couple of years ago. It's about becoming a master implementer. And if you want to become a master implementer, especially in self-development, it's the idea of becoming a warrior of the mind versus a librarian of the mind. Okay? Now, you might want to write that down. It's becoming a warrior of the mind versus a librarian of the mind. Let's take a little sip there. So many people treat self-development like a theoretical practice. They read the books, but then they don't take action on what they've read. So they have what I would call shelf development. Yeah, shelf development. They've shelved the information. So what they teach themselves and their personal paradigm is, I listen and read books, I acknowledge the information is very helpful, then I do nothing with it. And the reason I've become successful in my life is because I take 1 to 5 things from every single book that I read. As soon as I finish reading the book, I implement or I teach it. And you're often teaching it, implementing it at the same time. So before I begin, I want to share a hierarchy of how you turn information into transformation. Well, the first stage, as you're listening to information, we're probably hearing something that we have heard before. We might read it in a book, we might be showing this in a training or maybe taught by a teacher. We might have heard this information at stage 1 before. But what changes in terms of transformation is we listen differently. I might be sharing something with you on this podcast that you've heard or experienced before, but you slowing down and really listening and saying, actually, that's really profound. And you've maybe heard it in a way today, or you've been in a place in your life to hear it today, that you move into the second phase of moving information and transformation, which is insight, okay? We have an insight. We see something differently because of the information we've received. And we see something from a totally different perspective. And that, as soon as we have an insight, I can see this differently now, we move into action. And then we test our insights. And that's stage 3, which is transformation. We test our insights with action. And Dusan Djukic said this in Straight Line Leadership. We don't change our life by having insights. we change our life by testing them. Deep work. 90-minute block in my calendar. Okay, I could do about 6 of them this week. Open your calendar right now and test that by putting them in for next week. That is how you turn information into transformation. I've met so many people that have told me they've read all the books, but they're still exactly where they were 5 years ago. Okay, so that's the 3-stage system of turning information into transformation. Here are the main symptoms of poor implementation. So this is like a checklist. So if you've done the scorecard, so if you visit the link in this podcast bio, the comments, there's a link to a scorecard, and you can assess your level of implementation. One of the pillars is implementation. But here's how you might be able to spot this anyway. Your calendar does not have deep work stretches in it. You haven't got 90 to half-day stretches where you're uninterrupted doing one thing. So it's almost surefire thing that you're not doing deep work if there's multiple different things in that are different categories, like ringing clients, answering calls, doing sales calls, trying to produce content. Most people try and do 5 things when they can only do 1. You feel reactive. Actually, you spend most of your time reacting to your business or your career. You're reacting to things. You constantly feel like you're chasing that moment where you get to create, but you're spending most of your time dealing with other people's wants and needs. That's another sign of poor implementation and boundaries. You can't remember a time where you felt like you were performing. Now, if you cast your mind across the last year, when was the last time you really felt that you were performing at a level which was way above and beyond anything that you'd done before? I can hand on heart say I'm doing this right now. You're scrolling a lot. If you're a really clear sign that you're not implementing is that you're consuming, you're scrolling. You haven't grown. If you were to hand on heart look at your life, maybe your income, maybe your relationship, you can say my relationship, my income, my fitness has not grown in the last 3 months, 6 months. It might have grown, but your belly might have grown. That's what normally happens to me if I definitely haven't been implementing my fitness goals. You put things off. Action is always in the future. You're always getting around to it. You need to get back to. So when you think about action, it's always in the future. It's never in the moment. Things that could get done in the moment, you say, oh yeah, I'll do it after the call. I speak to a lot of my clients and I say, if I'm going to do an intro or something, I was like, hey, can I do that right now? Because it's likely I'll forget after the call. And there's nothing wrong with that. You say you're good at multitasking. And if you say that you're good at multitasking, you're lying to yourself. Okay, that's been proven time and time again in studies of concentration and focus. Nobody is good at multitasking. And the final one is you have no structure. You're chaos. You're chaotic. Okay, so these are the symptoms of poor implementation. So in the scorecard, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 statements that you can agree or disagree with, and they will give you a clear indication of what your level of implementation is currently at. I can guarantee that if you start to do things like take action immediately, put actions into your calendar, create deep work blocks and get better and better at doing longer and longer stretches of deep work, that your life will change, that you will go 10x, because so many people, when they do this, they notice there is a massive inflection in their work and their life. But this is the best part. When you get really good at deep work, you get better at deep love. You are so much more present with your loved ones. You're in the room. Like when my 2 kids are in the room and I'm not present with them, they're chaos. They know that I'm not present and they vie for my attention. But because I feel guilty that I haven't done enough work in that day, because I haven't been doing deep work, I've been scattered, I've been ineffective, I haven't had my cell phone switched off, I haven't done something like what I'm doing today. What tends to happen is that it means that I feel guilty and not present later on. So if you want to be a present mother or father, deep work is the best way to go about doing that, because you just are so much more effective with your time. So you're not trying to spread your calendar further and further, give yourself longer and longer for projects. You get what needs to be done, and you perform. And I can guarantee, when you're performing at your best, you feel darn amazing. So today's podcast I was really like having a plan to master implementation. And here are 5 simple things that you can do to become a master of implementation as well. Is create a calendar which is creative before reactive. So doing the first thing that requires most of your energy and bandwidth first. Today, for example, this, like speaking one way at a podcast, I don't edit these at all. I just put them straight out. As you can hear when my brother rang me before and when I take a sip of water, it takes an enormous amount of bandwidth. It takes a lot of focus to go one way and talk like this for 45 minutes non-stop. I'm going to need a rest after this. So I create a calendar which is creative before reactive. So I'm going to go and look at my emails, reply to clients, get back to people after this, maybe in the morning. But do the first thing that requires most of your energy first. The second thing is have a plan. Know what's urgent versus important. And you can get help with this. This is where coaching is very, very helpful. Most things that seem urgent are not urgent. Most things that are important are put last in the calendar. So these are things like on a Monday when your energy is high, what are you doing? Are you reacting to client messages, or are you creating something with all that energy and momentum that you've got from thinking over the weekend? The third thing, prioritize rest. Something I taught in the training world is training equals exercise plus recovery, and they are equal measures. Exercise plus recovery. You can't just train and get results. When you are as effective with your recovery as you are with your exercise, that's when you get the best results. So think about prioritizing rest. Like, what have you got in your arsenal, which is a higher level coping mechanism for volume, like ice baths, like meditation, like breath work, like massage, like all these things that are going to help you enormously. You can't just use alcohol, caffeine, sugar, or cigarettes to numb out. They just won't work in the long term. 2 more. So the fourth one, is create a structure and obey it. And there's a famous quote by, I think it's Nietzsche, I'm going to paraphrase this: the man who cannot command himself will have to obey. So if you put something in your calendar and you don't obey it, that is going to have an imprint. So, when you see something like deep work or calls or sales calls or produce a certain product or service in your calendar, obey it. That is enormous. It makes a massive difference. But don't go from zero structure, where you've got nothing in your calendar, to having 50 things. Build it up slowly over time, and it makes a massive difference. And the final one is implementation intentions. If this, then that algorithms. I talked about my water bottle. I talk about it a lot because it's an implementation intention. As I go to do something, valuable, which is deep work, I will fill my water bottle. So I come to the desk maybe 3-4 times a day. I'm constantly filling my water bottle. That is hardwired together. I've done it for years. It's easy. I don't have to think about it. It means that I'm not consciously having to remember to hydrate. And a lot of people's problems with hydration is it's very conscious for them. They have to really think about it. And so when they stop thinking about it, or they become overloaded thinking about things like business, life, work, stress, all these other things, they forget to do it, which then entrenches that stress, poor performance, more stress, and that's how we get through that. So think about what implementation intentions you can create. I can help you with that, because if anything in today's session, anything in today's podcast has resonated, come on a free workshop where I help you with implementing what you've maybe had an insight into today. It's called the 5 steps to go 10X. And actually, it's the first step to go 10X. Might rename the workshop. Because the first step is creating a vision. And when you've got a clear vision, things like implementation become way, way easier. The link to come on that workshop for free, as a gift for coming on the podcast today, is in the comments. If you haven't done the scorecard already, please do it because it's so valuable. You'll have a great insight. And what happens is as soon as you've completed it, I will personally review your answers and send you a 2-minute video where you can go through and you can look at what is actually the best place that you can focus your implementation on, your attention, your energy on to move the needle for you. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. We've got one more left in this micro series, and I'm excited to continue the journey. Thanks for listening, team.